This is Mandela, the man and his country.
It was an announcement South Africa and the world had awaited for more than a quarter of a century.
I am now in a position to announce that Mr. Nelson Mandela will be released at the Victor Verster prison on Sunday, the 11th of February, at about 3 p.m.
The response in the streets of South Africa's cities and towns was instantaneous. Joyous and violent. "71-year-old Nelson Mandela, symbol worldwide for the oppressed of South Africa, was free, finally. 27 years a captive of the minority white South African government. 27 years the almost invisible symbol for South Africa's black nationalist movements. 27 years waiting for an end to his isolation. But now that he is free, the questions really begin. Who is Nelson Mandela? How did he become such a larger-than-life symbol? What does his freedom mean for him, for the movements he served as moral symbol and more, for South Africa, its majority of blacks, its minority of whites? Hello, I'm Morton Dean of ABC News. For much of the next hour, sit and learn about Mandela the man and Mandela the symbol, about the changing face of Africa and the bitter struggle inside South Africa that Nelson Mandela has come to represent. We'll hear from Jesse Jackson, author-historian James Michener, and South African author Rian Milan, who has written so movingly of his country's struggles. But before we can go forward, we really must go back to set the stage. Africa, at the turn of the century, a colonial preserve for the British, the French, the Germans, Italians, Belgians, and Portuguese. An imperial gold mine where the white man ruled the black man's homeland. By the end of the Second World War, the colonial map had begun to change. Slowly, spheres of influence were carved up into countries, and independence began to come. In the 50s, to Ghana, Guinea, Morocco, Tunisia, and others. At the start of the 60s, more or less in orderly fashion, the ranks of the newly independent were joined by Chad, Nigeria, Senegal, Gabon. In the main, all of it peaceful or relatively so. And then there was Kenya. Kenya, where black nationalism crystallized into violent uprising, where 11,000 would die in a vicious tribal guerrilla war for black independence. When you think of Kenya and the birth of independent black Africa, one name leaps to mind: Jomo Kenyatta, the Kikuyu warrior, leader of the Mau Mau, the first real black independence uprising in Africa. Kenyatta, the man who for 8 years would be, like Mandela was to become, a symbol behind bars. Imprisoned for terrorism, Kenyatta would lead his movement from jail, later to emerge in 1961 and ultimately become Prime Minister of an independent Kenya, the first of the African lands to fully break away, violently, from the yoke of British African colonialism. In the minds of many, Kenya was the first of the white dominoes in Africa not to fall, but to be pushed. The first in 1963, but not the last, as black nationalism swept down and across the continent. For better, and in some cases for worse, it swept away white colonial rule. Some governments were overthrown, some ceded power. What had been for decades the white man's incredibly wealthy colonial preserve began to disappear. The momentum of the black national freedom movement produced Tanzania in 1964. Tanganyika and Zanzibar were no more. The same year, British North Rhodesia disappeared as Zambia was born. British Bechuanaland was swept away in 1966 as Botswana came into existence. In 1971, the birth of Zaire, the death of the remains of the Belgian Congo. Portuguese Angola became independent Angola, followed by Mozambique in 1975. In 1980, Southern Rhodesia became independent Zimbabwe. South Africa had become isolated, the last white-ruled country on the continent, the last trench in the black nationalist war for African independence. In 1980, Jomo Kenyatta was dead. Nelson Mandela, who replaced him as the black nationalist symbol, had already been in jail for 17.5 years. But his power and that of his movement were growing. To understand the symbol that Nelson Mandela has become, it's first necessary to understand Mandela the man, to understand the circumstances of his life. It was here, in the Transkei territory, that he was born, on July 18, 1918. Blacks had been forced to these territories after the ruling white government passed the Native Land Act in 1913. The act forbid black ownership of land or sharecropping or tenant farming anywhere but in these so-called African reserves. These restrictions only foreshadowed the more sweeping doctrine of apartheid to come. Mandela was born into the royalty of the Tembu tribe, and Nelson, like his father, was being groomed to become a chief. But during his education at the Methodist Mission Center in Helltown and later at Fort Hare University College, he decided to pursue a career in law. Activism came early to Nelson Mandela. Participation in a student strike resulted in him being thrown out of Fort Hare at the age of 22. But 2 years later, he did receive his degree, and 2 years after that, in 1944, he joined the African National Congress. Having moved to Johannesburg, Mandela, together with Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu, founded the Congress Youth League of the ANC. In those early years, Mandela was an organizer and a leader, a believer in protest, but also in nonviolence. In 1948, the all-white National Party legally